Please take your Bibles and turn to 1 Timothy chapter 3 and read along and follow along as I read all 16 verses. It is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. An overseer, that's just another name for elder, same word. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? And not a new convert, so that he will not become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he will not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Deacons likewise must be men of dignity, not double-tongued, or addicted to much wine, or fond of sordid gain, but holding to the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. These men must also first be tested, then let them serve as deacons if they are beyond reproach. Women must likewise be dignified, not malicious gossips, but temperate, faithful in all things. Deacons must be husbands of only one wife, and good managers of their children and their own households. For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a high standing and great confidence in the faith that is in Christ Jesus. I am writing these things to you, hoping to come to you before long. But in case I am delayed, I write so that you will know how one ought to conduct himself in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and support of the truth. By common confession, great is the mystery of godliness. He who was revealed in the flesh was vindicated in the Spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory. When Donna and I went to seminary, we visited a PCA church. We stayed there, but we visited a PCA church, and we were greeted by a very personable and welcoming elder. He was faithful in attending all of the services, and he taught Sunday school. One day, we hadn't been there too long, one day after Sunday school, he told me and some others that he was sick and was going home. That afternoon, his wife called and asked me to pray for him during the evening service since I was leading the service. So I prayed for him, and as I prayed for him, I noticed that within the congregation that nobody seemed to be concerned at all that this man was homesick and had to miss the service. Monday, I heard that elder and his son won the local father-son golf tournament Sunday afternoon. So I asked a man in the church about it. He laughed and said that elder did that every year during the tournament. He said, just ignore it, he's a nice guy. So I asked the pastor about the same thing, and he laughed, and he said the same thing. He told me just to ignore it. I told the pastor that he made a mockery of prayer in front of God and the congregation, and that he involved his wife in the scheme. It didn't bother him a bit. He said he's a nice guy. I didn't say this morning, but he also had nice ways of letting you know how much he donated to the church. He was one of our best in that department, apparently. This man helped teach newly nominated men about the office of elder and deacon. Do you think anybody paid any attention to what he taught? He was also clerk of the session. He was in his mid-60s, and he'd been raised in a Presbyterian church. How many sermons do you suppose he heard based on 1 Timothy chapter 3, Titus chapter 1, which teaches duties of elders and deacons, and Acts chapter 6, the first part of it, where deacons were first employed? Without a doubt, he heard excellent sermons on being above reproach, being faithful, and having a good reputation in all things. Now let's face it, each of us here can define the terms all on our own without any help from anybody else, the terms that describe the qualifications for elder and a deacon. You can do that very accurately. You know what the words mean that are listed in this chapter. Now, knowing what those words mean is necessary, and I think that should be preached on from time to time, but we need men who display the qualities that are described in this chapter. If you cannot define these terms on your own, you probably should not be nominating men for the office of elder and deacon. Let somebody else do it. My biggest failures with sermons has been preaching on this text. People often ignore the message and nominate people that they either like, or they nominate their husbands or their sons or some other family member. Plus, quite often people get nominated and accept the nomination, and they're not qualified for the office either, and they do this after hearing me preach on 1 Timothy chapter 3. Today, I want to distinguish very little between the office of elder and deacon. The qualifications for those offices are very similar to each other. Verse 15 explains why Paul wrote this epistle to Timothy. He wrote, I write so that you will know how one ought to conduct himself in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and support of the truth. It's safe to say that as church leaders go, so goes the church, and that's true for the better or for the worse. Christian leadership is a matter of personal character. One's spirituality and Christian character is everything in church leaders. During the Vietnam War, Norman Swapkoff took command of a battalion. The outgoing commander said, I hope you do better than I did. I tried to lead, but this is a lousy battalion and it lacks self-confidence. A real leader would not call his battalion lousy. He would work to make it better. Church officers should not complain. They should work hard to make things better within the church. A real leader does not accuse his men of lacking self-confidence. He finds a way to build up that self-confidence. Church officers are to work with church members to help them through difficult times in their life. When you work with someone on an individual basis like that, that falls under the category of being able to teach. When Swapkoff left, morale was up, casualties were down, and the Viet Cong thought that a tougher battalion had moved in. How badly churches need leadership like that. Too many church officers cop out of their responsibilities by complaining about things rather than acting on things and improving them. We need elders and deacons who will work to make our church stronger, to lift up our spirits, and to accept the responsibilities of the office and work to expand upon that. Verse 1 says, a man who aspires to the office of elder, overseer, elder, same word, desires a fine work. But if he desires it for the wrong reason, he should not be elected to the office. It's realistic to say that within the church, leadership can best be defined in terms of servanthood. If our leaders will serve all of us equally, all but the most stubborn, hard-headed of people will follow. Unfortunately, I can't say everyone follows, but the majority will. One major problem that we have today within the church is finding good men who are willing to stand in the gap and serve Jesus Christ as officers. Not serving is the easy way out of your responsibility as a Christian. Ezekiel chapter 22 and verse 30, this is God speaking. He said, I searched for a man who will build up the wall and stand in the gap before me so that I would not destroy the land. And then God said, I found no one. How sad and how tragic that he couldn't find anybody who would stand in the gap and serve himself. I assume that we will find more than one person willing to stand in the gap for elder and deacon. Pete mentioned a few minutes ago that we have 4 people who have been nominated already, and that's very, very good, and we still have time for some more. Now, verses 2 through verse 12 describe what an elder or a deacon should be like. Everything there shows an attitude of servanthood. Jesus Christ, at the Last Supper, in Luke chapter 22 and verse 27, said, who is greater, he who reclines at the table or the one who serves? Jesus was reclining at the table when he said this. Now, don't take that too far. That's what Jesus said. Okay. Jesus also said in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 45, even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. I know Jesus was God's second person of the Trinity. I know all of that. But he came to serve. He left heaven above, took on flesh, and came to serve us, his people. This is how it is supposed to be. He who reclines at the table, this is how it is supposed to be. The idea of church officers serving has been lost by a lot of churches. I think in the PCA we're doing pretty good, but we're certainly not perfect. Elders and deacons who think their responsibilities are mainly limited to making decisions are absolutely missing their calling. Acts chapter 6, the first 6 verses, Pete read through these a week or so ago, but it describes people who were complaining about the apostles being too busy to help people with their personal needs. So they chose helpers to do this so that they would not have to neglect the teaching and preaching of the word. And then verse 7 gives the results of what happened after they appointed these other people. The result was the word of God spread and the number of disciples increased. Each group served their own purposes. We need that kind of spirit of cooperation from all of our officers. Verse 2 and following describes how elders must live, blameless, one wife at a time. It didn't say at a time, but I did. One wife at a time, temperate, sober-minded, have good behavior, be hospitable, and the list goes on. Respectability and servanthood is the idea that's put forth here. Will Rogers described this as one who's not afraid to sell the family parrot to the town gossip. Be in your home what you are in church and everywhere else. Jiminy Cricket said to Pinocchio, let your conscience be your guide. That's good advice in a play or a movie or a book, but it's not good advice in real life. In real life, your conscience will fool you. All of us find ways to justify everything that we do. Verse 5, Paul said, the goal of our instruction is love from a pure heart and a good conscience. Here's where the conscience comes in, and a sincere faith. A good conscience can be your guide if it is surrounded by a pure heart and a sincere faith. A sincere faith leads to a good conscience. That's the good conscience at the center of your moral life. And all of this allows for love coming from a pure heart. That was the goal of Paul's teaching in 1 Timothy. It's easy to say our officers should fit this description, but this is written to everyone within the church. This isn't just about church officers. This was a personal letter written by Paul to Timothy for the church in Ephesus. In addition to everything else, in verse 9, we continue on with elders and deacons, they must hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. Mystery in the Bible refers to something that was hidden but now is revealed. Elders and deacons must know their theology. This is absolutely necessary. You understand your theology because you are leaders within the church. What you say and think and believe will be passed on in one way or another to other people within the church. I read a book a while ago. It was labeled Well-Intentioned Dragons. The idea is that those who cause problems within the church believe that they are doing the right thing, but they have hard consciences, and this leads them astray. No love and ignorance of sound theology causes problems within the church. It's like if you were in a Baptist church and you had been nominated to be a deacon and you didn't believe in immersion, would you make a good deacon? No, you wouldn't. You have to be in agreement with the theology of the body that you're going to serve. If you don't, you're going to cause division within the church. This doesn't mean that we are not to speak up if we see a problem or have a problem. We are to speak up. We are to go to our officers. And I really believe that here at the Kirk, if you go to any officer here with any kind of an issue or a problem, you're going to get an open ear and your complaint will be handled. Martin Luther said, it takes three things to make a godly man: prayer, meditation, and trials. And that's true. But to be a good officer, you need three more things. You need to be committed to the church to be an officer here. You need theological insight to the truth. Your theology must be sound. And you must be able to exercise self-control. Now, it's interesting that verses 4, 5, 11, and 12 are related to the families of elders and deacons. A church officer, if married, must have a godly wife. Now, whether we like it or not, their wives are held to a higher standard than other wives within the church. We might get together in a small group and decide that it shouldn't be that way. We can vote unanimously it shouldn't be that way, but it is. That's real life. The families live in glass houses. A godly wife helps her husband be a good elder or a deacon. Some harm their husbands in their offices of elder and deacon. If your wife gossips, don't accept a nomination. It's as easy as that. It will hinder you from being a good officer. The Kirk will reflect its leaders. If our leadership is biblically centered, this church will be biblically centered. Whatever the leaders reflect will be adopted by the people in the pew. Remember my opening illustration. The people all smiled at a poor example of a Christian, let alone an elder. Verse 15 says, the church is the pillar and support of the truth. Just think about it. Jesus has trusted the kirk into our hands and our influence. That's a lot of trust. It's a high calling to serve Jesus within his church. Luke chapter 12, the last part of verse 48 says, from everyone who has been given much, much will be required. And to whom they entrusted much, of him they will ask all the more. That passage and a couple of others really bothered me when I was considering going into seminary and going into the ministry. All that is required and expected of church officers and leaders within his church. Verse 16 explains the great mystery of godliness. The great mystery is he who was revealed in the flesh, was vindicated by the Spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, and taken up in glory. What an awesome description we have of Jesus Christ. The great mystery is revealed, and there's no controversy about who or what it is. Now, in conclusion, if we took all of the qualifications for elders and deacons from Timothy chapter 3, Titus chapter 1, and Acts chapter 6, first 6 verses, we have roughly 20 specific qualities outlined for us. Now listen to this. 18 of the 20 are not related primarily to spiritual gifts, talent, or ability. See, we talk about people being spiritually gifted, but the qualities that God outlined are your reputation, your ethics, your temperament, your morals, your habits, and your spiritual maturity. And your theology is added right in there as well. We should look at people to see how they have handled trials in the past, and we can be pretty confident they will handle a trial within this church as they have handled trials in the past. No description of duties were given other than being a good servant. The kirk will have established duties and responsibilities for the elders and the deacons within this church, and that is good. It's up to us to react to those duties and what it is that the church expects of us.